I would like to welcome everybody to the Monomoy Regional School District School Committee meeting for Thursday, December 16th, beginning at 6:37. This meeting will take place partially remotely pursuant to the law signed by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021, an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, which includes an extension until April 1st, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of his March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. And this meeting will be recorded. May I have a roll call? And I'll start in the Zoom room with Sharon.
Aye. Here present.
Danielle.
Present.
Tina.
Present.
Jessica.
Present.
Terry.
Present.
Jackie. Present. And I am also here. Next we have public comment. Seeing none, we will move on. Unfortunately, we were supposed to have our Monomoy Regional High School student representative, Charlotte Blute, join us with a report tonight, but unfortunately she is feeling under the weather, so she will not be joining us. So we will move on to reports and discussions. And we will welcome our new Chatham School Committee member, Jessica Rogers. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you. I'm really excited to join you.
Good. We're excited to have you. Next, under reports and discussions, we will give the mic to Ms. Gilnett to talk about our winter sports update.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good. Good
How are
to be
you?
here. So Dr. Carpenter asked me to just give you an update on our COVID protocols for the winter sports, being that they are all indoor sports. So essentially the MIA came out with some basic guidelines, which are that masks are mandatory for all players, coaches, and officials for all indoor practices and games. Masks are mandatory in all school buildings, so therefore all spectators in our school buildings, masks are mandatory for them as well. Events hosted at other venues, like ice hockey rinks, spectators follow the guidelines of the venue. But players, coaches, and officials will remain masked regardless. So as far as the MIA is concerned, they really focused on the players, coaches, and officials as far as wearing masks, and sort of left everything else up to us as the district. And so since we don't own the hockey rink and it would be, I think, hard to manage, we are going with whatever their guidance is. We play out at Tony Kent, and it's strongly recommended there that they wear them, but it's not mandatory. So it's strongly encouraged, but it's not mandatory there. And then the MIA has come out and said that they are planning to reevaluate the mask protocol in January. So we'll have an update on that then. Other than that, mask is really the biggest thing as far as what affects our players on a daily basis. Other than that, it's really what happens if we have a positive COVID case on one of our teams. And I met with our nursing staff and our principal, and we sort of ran it by Dr. Carpenter as well, and have decided to stay consistent with what is going on in our school buildings and with the DESE guidance. So basically, the only difference is, if there's a COVID positive in the classroom, it's easier to tell who were close contacts than if there's a COVID positive on a team. It's really hard to say if they were close contact for 15 minutes, throughout a practice or a game or whatever. So I also reached out to the other athletic directors on the Cape and Islands in our league, and we're all kind of doing the same thing. which is on teams, all players would be identified as close contacts. And then from there, we follow the same DESI guidelines that we follow for in-school close contacts. So vaccinated players just are fine. They need to monitor for symptoms. They can still participate. And they monitor for symptoms, and the nurses recommend testing after 5 to 7 days, or if they develop symptoms, staying home and testing. And then unvaccinated players, again, are following the same test and stay protocol that we follow for our in-school close contact. So unvaccinated players can participate in the test and stay program, where they test in the morning. And if they're negative, they stay in school like everyone else, and they can go to practice or a game, whatever it is that day, and follow that guidance. And if they choose not to participate in test and stay, then they quarantine just like they would if they were in class and they chose not to test and stay and they were labeled as a close contact. So again, we're following the same guidance that DESI follows, as laid out for in-school close contact. Our athletic trainer, which is all great if things happen Monday through Friday, but sometimes stuff happens on the weekends. So we met again and decided, and I spoke with our athletic trainer, Dylan Murray, and she is on board with this, and we've actually have implemented it already because we have had a couple of positives on our teams already. Fortunately, they were isolated, outside of sports related, and they were isolated, so that's been good. But on Saturdays, Taylor will do the test and stay herself for any athletes who have games on Saturdays. If it's a practice, then they'll stay home and they won't practice that day if they're in test and stay protocols. But for games, I thought games are more important, and if it's a practice, if they can stay home for a practice, but for a game, she's agreed to come in on a Saturday to do the test and stay. So that's what we're going with. And for vacations, since everybody's off, our nursing staff's off, we all kind of agreed that if anything happens over vacation, and Taylor will still be around and she'll still be covering some home games, but she won't be in every day over vacation. So if we find out about a case on one of our teams over any of the vacations, unvaccinated players will have to quarantine until we can kind of figure out when we get back to school, and either put in test and stay if it's past the time, or they can start playing it if they reach their quarantine time. So I just thought that it was way too hard to manage for one person over the vacations, when essentially, it's supposed to be a vacation. So that's kind of how we're moving forward with that. And that's pretty much it. Other than that, it's really business as usual, which has been a lot of fun. We've had, every team has had a home game so far. And we've had good crowds, and we've had good student sections, and other than the masks, which, has become normal, sadly enough. So other than the masks, it's been great. And we've had, like I said, good student sections, good groups of fans, and some really good games so far. So it does feel more like the way high school sports should feel. Do you guys have any questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Karen. Just curious, do we have access to the women's and the men's basketball team? Would the coach know who would be unvaccinated on these teams?
He does
Is that
not.
personal issues?
That's actually falls under the HIPAA law, so that is why Taylor has access to that information as our medical professional in the athletic department.
So it'd be ideal if all the players happened be all double vaccinated,
It
but
would,
that may not be the case.
correct.
Good, thank you.
Any other, Sharon, I see your hand up.
I just want to compliment you. I think that you're dealing with something that's a tough situation, and it's great to have things laid out so it's clear for people that they know what's what. And, we're going to have to deal with this till it's over. So thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any other questions? I just have one. Limited spectators, locked off bleachers.
Nope,
Okay,
nope, we
just masks.
just masks. I mean, we don't have any limitations on spectators. There are any state regulations on that.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
Go Sharks.
Woo! Yes. Okay, moving on to our preschool presentation, which I believe includes Ms. McGuire, Ms. Aldag, and Ms. Kelly. Oh, here she is.
Good evening. So nice to see everyone.
Yes.
Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services. Oh, want me to introduce you? Kelly Oldback, Principal at Harwich Elementary. Jennifer Kelly, Principal at Chatham Elementary. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start this evening. Oops. Can we move the room over to the left? Sharon, we're just going to move it to the left a little bit. Yes. All right, I can go back one slide. Great, there we go. Thank you. So I'm going to start and talk a little bit about the purpose of an integrated preschool, so you can get the context for why we actually have preschool. So the purpose really solely is to provide services and supports to children with disabilities, ages 3 to 5, or related services, and which I'll talk about in a little bit. So as an integrated preschool, what we're looking to do is to make sure that we're providing opportunities for them to learn with their peers in this environment. So we are obligated to make sure that we do what's called child find, and that is to make sure that we are evaluating students age 3 who are eligible for special education to come into our schools to receive services. And with that legal obligation actually comes quite a bit of work. One is the fact that children don't all turn 3 at the same time. They turn 3 all year long. So we need to make sure that we are evaluating students throughout the year. And because of that, our admission is always changing throughout the year. In addition to that, our children between the ages of 3 and 5 have to be carefully placed into the right program or the right classroom with the right peers and the right services. What we've noticed this year, and actually part of last year, most of our referrals come through what's called early intervention, and that's birth to 3, where medical complications are required to provide services to those students. Last year, early intervention did not provide services. They only provided services via teletherapy and not to our most vulnerable children. So what we're seeing this year, unfortunately, is not our consistent early intervention referrals. We're seeing referrals from students who were never seen by early intervention, coming out of hospitals, coming out of doctors' offices. Huge impact, which impacts us greatly because we really plan our preschool programming based on a 6-month prediction of students who are coming out of early intervention. So that's one of our struggles, looking at how we can place our students appropriately. The other part that we have to look at is when you have an integrated preschool, you have to have a certain percentage of students who are typical peers for those students. So in other words, we have to have 49% of our students who are receiving special education services And 51% of our population has to be typical peers. So as you can imagine, that can be very tricky in terms of being able to meet those obligations. The students who are typical peers are coming in on a tuition. We typically have had a difficult time in the past actually meeting that number. And you cannot have more students receiving special education services than your typical peers. So we need to really pay attention to that. And currently we have 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. sessions, 4 days a week. So when we're evaluating those students, we have to be very mindful of what particular session is going to meet their needs. The other obligation we have is to do what's called a program evaluation. And this is of all special education programs. This year in particular, we were looking at doing the preschool program, because what we've seen from this past year is a significant amount of complexity that has come into our schools. So we really want to evaluate the services we have to make sure they're appropriate. As we move forward in this, I also want to caution, we spent a lot of time, because as we're talking about Chatham and Harwich, we have to be very mindful of confidentiality. So please take that into consideration as we're talking about numbers versus students, because we want to maintain that. So what are the ever-changing needs of special education? You know, coming into a preschool, you know, what we think about is kids coming in and learning play skills and social skills and all these different skills. The complexities that we're seeing now include all of these additional services: speech and language, vision services, physical therapy. We have a teacher of the deaf, occupational therapy, mobility training, and then other multiple services that need to be integrated into the child's day. We're seeing kids that have such medical complexities that require medical machine. And again, I'm being very cautious in how I'm presenting, but I need people to understand the complexity of what we're seeing. We're also seeing that because there was no early intervention. So a lot of these students would have received that medical care prior to coming to us. So Mary's gonna move forward.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm Mary Oldback, principal of Harwich Elementary. We thought we would just take a step back and look at the recommendation that was made last spring. Up until this school year, there had been a preschool at Chatham Elementary, one at Harwich Elementary, and both integrated preschools. And the decision was made going into this school year to regionalize the preschool under one roof at Harwich Elementary. So this slide is from the presentation that was made last spring when that recommendation was made. It's literally copied exactly from that presentation. So I just wanted to review that recommendation and what led to that. If we look at the Chatham Elementary preschool at that time, and remember, these are numbers from the spring of 2021, and as Melissa talked about, we do our very best to project the number of students that we're going to have, knowing what is coming 6 months out through early intervention. But we, have kids who move in, move out, and we also have students who come in to us from other avenues, such as not through early intervention, but through, say, pediatricians' offices and things. So last year when we were looking at this, we were estimating the Chatham would have 2 sessions, morning and an afternoon session. At that point in time, we had 4 students from Chatham receiving special education services. And as Melissa said, we need the addition of 1 peer so that we have 49% special education students. But the reason why that's actually 6 instead of 5 is you just think about the fact that there's 2 sessions, an AM and a PM. So that's why that number is 2. It reflects the 2 sessions. For a total of 10 students, 1 full-time special education student. The 76,000 is the number that we were using to estimate the cost of that certified teacher. And our assistants in our preschools are 0.8. They don't work on Wednesdays. We do not have preschool on Wednesdays. That's when the teachers have all of their special education team meetings and screenings. So that is why you'll see all of our instructional assistants at 0.8 instead of a 1.0. So if we just look at the total staffing costs, we're looking at about 108,000 last year for Chatham Elementary. It's very important to pay attention to that third bullet on the bottom left, that these costs really are only reflective of staffing, and they do not include the costs for related service providers, all of the other service providers that Melissa just mentioned, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language, teacher of the deaf, etc. Overhead materials and transportation. We're required to offer transportation to our special education students. So if we just looked at having the preschool at Chatham for those 4 special education students and building the model around that, we came up with a staff cost per student of $10,800. And if we, as we move into the Harwich Elementary Preschool, again, this is standalone, Chatham Elementary Integrated Preschool, Harwich Elementary Integrated Preschool. We have 4 sessions. We have 2 integrated classrooms, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old classroom at Harwich Elementary with Jen McGilvin with the 3-year-olds and Aaron Cronin with the 4-year-olds. And at that point in time, we had approximately 20 special education students. And again, the typical peers, you see a +4 there because there's 4 sessions and a total students of 44. The staffing that you see there is the 2 special education teachers, 4 instructional assistants for a total staffing cost of $280,000. And then if we look at that ratio, the staff cost per student of $6,364. So when we were considering this last spring of combining the Chatham resident student and the students in the Harwich resident students, the third column is the model that you see there. And the sessions doesn't change, it's still 2 teachers in a morning and afternoon session. And we have the 4 students from Chatham, the 20 from Harwich for a total of 24 special education preschoolers. And then our typical peers again, 4 more because there's 4 sessions. Staffing remains the same because the impact of the additional students and peers didn't require a change in those staffing ratios. So with the regionalization of the preschool, it drove the staff cost per student down to $5,385. So I just want to touch base on that just so you had some context for how that decision was made last spring. Next slide, please. So as we look at our current student body in our integrated preschool, these are our numbers right now for our students and where they live. In December of 2021, we have a total of 7 Chatham resident students. We have 4 of those students are receiving special education services. 3 of them are typical peers. And in the program right now, we have 34 Harwich resident students. 15 of those students are receiving special education services and 19 of them are typical peers. So that's what the residency looks like as of today. Next slide, please. So as we look forward to next year, and Melissa talked about how the complexion of our students has changed so dramatically with COVID. We really see it in this chart. We have seen a significant and dramatic increase in the number of students who require intensive special education services that will require a sub-separate intensive program in preschool. And so what we have looked at here is an enrollment that we know of as far forward as we can go with the numbers that we know and the students that we have screened and evaluated and we know are incoming to February of 2022. And we have 3 different models here for consideration. I'm going to talk about all 3 of the models, and Melissa's going to dive in a little bit more deeply into the Chatham preschool model and explain the complexities there. You see that at Chatham Elementary, we have 6 students receiving special education services with 8 typical peers, but we've gone from a morning and an afternoon session to 4 sessions. And that is because of the fact that we need to meet the needs of the students who require intensive services. That requires a sub-separate classroom and a teacher with a different certification than an intensive certification versus our special education classroom teachers who can have the moderate certification. But we still need the 2 teachers for a total of 4 sessions because of the intensive needs of the kids that we see coming in, as Melissa talked about how COVID has impacted our youngest and most vulnerable kids. And again, we have the 0.8 instructional assistants at Chatham, 3 of the assistants for a total staffing cost of $230,000. And if we look at that ratio, the staff cost per student in this model is $16,429. We see the similar impact of needing the additional intensive classroom at Harwich Elementary. You see in the middle column there, Harwich Elementary Integrated Preschool. The sessions have now will go up to 6. That is because we have the addition of the intensive sub-separate classroom and teacher. We actually have already posted for that position. It's went up on December 3rd because these kids are actually here already and there are more coming and we need to meet their needs. So we have the 15 students with special education services, 19 typical peers for total students of 34. You see the addition of the 3rd teacher there under the Harwich Preschool. 5 assistants. We've posted and have posted for 2 more assistants and have been able to hire 1. It's a very difficult job market right now, hiring market. And so our total staffing costs that we're looking at, again, we're talking about numbers that we know of as of February, is $357,000 or a staff cost per student of $10,500. So as we move to the regional model, very similarly to last spring in terms of scale, the sessions remains the same at 6. Again, 2 integrated preschool rooms, 1 sub-separate classroom, and we have, we just are adding together the Chatham resident students and Harwich resident students for 21, and the typical peers for 27, giving us about 48 students. Again, the teachers do not increase from the Harwich model. They remain the same at 3. We do have a slight increase in the number of assistants that we need to 0.4 by 0.4. And when we look at that ratio, staff cost per student on a regional level with the regional model, it drops to $7,638. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to have her explain this Chatham Elementary preschool model in a little bit more detail.
Thanks. So what I want to do, because we spent a lot of time trying to design a preschool program at Chatham, and every model that we looked at failed in terms of our ability to meet our student needs. So let me explain that. So if we were to have, say, an AM and PM session in Chatham, our most needy kids require a sub-separate program. So say those students went to the AM session. They now have no opportunity to have any level of integration with their peers. The PM session will be our other special education students. Now, if you notice, there's only 4. So think about how we are able to design a program with 4 students with some needing a separate program. So we looked at that. Then we looked at doing a double AM session so that there could be opportunity for integration. But think about that. We would need to hire a 0.5 intensive special need teacher and another 0.5 special education teacher. Not feasible at all. So what we decided is we really needed to show the model that is the only way we could do it. In doing that, we have to understand that with 4 students in 4 sessions, how do we possibly put them into the appropriate sessions with 1 or 2 needing a sub-separate, and then you're only going to have 1 student potentially in the other sessions. And the concern with that is also that our most vulnerable students would be overshadowed by typical peers. And the whole point of an integrated preschool is to service students with special needs. So we showed this model because every other configuration failed our students. So that's why this one is up here, because it's the only one we could even remotely think about that would include our kids in an opportunity to be included with their peers. So I hope that, because it's very complex in terms of explaining how you need to place your students, and it doesn't allow for flexibility for placing them in the appropriate session. So that's why this model is shown up here. So yeah, I know you might have questions because that's very complex. So if I need to run through it again.
Mr. Russell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of catching up, Melissa, thanks. Prior to the last couple of years, when the preschool 3- and 4-year-old issue between the 2 elementary schools became a real issue, that's why I can understand the complexity. Was there a time and space 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that, for example, Chatham had so many special ed kids that it would not only warrant their own separate program, I don't know what that number would be, but it would, you'd have 2 on the same, 2 programs going on a different track, Harwich and Chatham. That must mean no.
So no, you're talking about when the preschool was at Chatham?
Yes, yeah.
So their census has, it's always been a small preschool. As a matter of fact, the year before last, it was going down to only 1 session with just a 0.5 teacher. And then it was only 2 students. So that's where it makes it very difficult to create an integrated experience with, again, focusing on the purpose of preschool to service our most vulnerable children, our children who need special education services. The other struggle we had, if we went back to Mary's census, and you looked at the Chatham residency, if you notice, there's not enough Chatham residents that are peer models. We've always struggled with that, to get, peer models for the program. So it's been a struggle for many years, and we didn't see the complexity that we're seeing right now. And that's everywhere. That's not, just unique to us. Those are the students that are coming out of our hospitals and early intervention. And we need to be able to flexibly service those students appropriately too. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. And an insight from kind of a newcomer to this age group kids. At first blush, you think that, gee, I'm lucky because my peer, regular ed kid, was accepted and I'm going to pay some tuition and he or she is in the program. Then when you find out that it's 4 days and 2 hours,
2.5.
2.5 hours, that mom and dad, they then get a bus or a pickup and go immediately to another outside daycare, or maybe home, I don't know, but so that's not such a great deal, first blush. No wonder, to my initial thought, no wonder you have a challenge getting peers to say, yes, we want to come, because it gives them a real answer to the next afternoon, or however that all works out. Thank you. This is more for me to just gain some insight.
I do see Sharon has her hand up. So Sharon, do you have a question right now for Melissa, or is your hand still up from before?
Now, I have a question. So this is very interesting to me. I used to have the classroom, the counseling office right next to the preschool program when I worked at Chatham Elementary. And so of course, my information is dated, but what I remember in there were intensive and not intensive together students, and there'd be one or two assistants depending on what the needs of the students were. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. Because Harwich Elementary is so much larger, I think it's sort of economy of scale or whatever, easier to deal with. But so I'm trying to understand how would that be different for Chatham Elementary than it was prior, because I think Miss Ko has intensive, I think she did both, but I'm not really up on it now.
So the difference that we're seeing for some of our children that are coming out now with medical fragility is the need for intensive services outside of that integrated preschool, meaning they need such explicit instruction, and on their individual education program, those minutes add up to about 2.5 hours of the need for PT, speech, OT, vision, nursing. And that you can't do in an integrated preschool without disrupting the whole program. Because now where are you doing those services? You can't do it in that because other children are trying to learn. So the level of we have not seen this intensity. Since I've been here, the level of intensity has just exploded. So it is very, very different when you have a level of that need. We have, incredible nursing services for some of these kids. And what happens is when you break apart Chatham students and Harwich students, of course, it then breaks apart the ability to provide that level of programming, okay, in one place. Does that answer your question, Sharon?
It does. I mean, I don't know if this is an appropriate question or not, but is it kids that are now that medical services are more advanced, kids at 2 pounds, babies at 2 pounds who never lived are living? Is it, those kind of changes that have happened over time that we're seeing this? Is it COVID? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We've seen this trend for years, and you're absolutely right that the advances medically are absolutely allowing our most vulnerable children to absolutely make progress and move forward. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely that. So the other part of what we saw with COVID, and I believe we will see that for the next 3 years, because when you think about children 0 to 3, mm-hmm. 2 years have been missed of that intensive early intervention services that prepares a child to go into a public school setting. So I believe we're going to see this increase of our student needs over the next 3 years because of the lack of services from the past 2 years. When we meet with early intervention every month, it's not unique to us. We meet with all the Cape and Islands and, talk about, these students who are coming to us, and there's no medically fragile program on the Cape anymore. Dennis Yarmouth used to have a medically fragile program. They don't have it anymore. It's very difficult to, really think about or projecting the future for some of these kids if we're not getting them early and if they don't have the services they need early. So there's kind of twofold with what we've seen all along and COVID having a significant impact on the students we're seeing. And we can't predict as much anymore. What we predicted from early intervention, they give us a list 6 months in advance. Here's the students receiving early intervention. So we know, okay, come this date, we're going to evaluate and make a determination.
That's very helpful. I am even more concerned because of the more full answer that you gave. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see in the future, meaning even next year, if these, I don't know what the difference would be if we provided longer hours or something like this. I know that's not our model, but, and I do know that this is affecting every grade, maybe not every student, but lots of students in every grade. But probably these kids that have this impact at this youngest age more severely. What are your thoughts on that?
The reason why you'll see predominantly half-day sessions in many preschools is because though our children that are that vulnerable don't have capacity to stay in school any longer. They're coming and they're receiving their services, but they're not at a place that they could stay someplace all day long because they need a level of care all day long. So that's why you'll see in most integrated preschools, you'll see half-day sessions because that's what they can tolerate. So that there's that complexity as well. So it's not about extra time for them. It's about what is their ability to be in a learning environment with their needs.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I do understand that. Thank you.
Ms. Tully?
Thank you. I certainly empathize and appreciate the complexity of what you all are trying to figure out. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the relationship between integrated and intensive. And I'm wondering if you could tease that out a little bit more for me, because one of the questions that I'm sitting here, and I don't know if it's because I'm not understanding something, that relationship is it possible to just pull out the intensive program out of the integrated pre-K program and just run the intensive program for the most vulnerable students that are in our district? And so that's where I think I need to understand a little bit better the relationship in between when we say integrated pre-K, but we have an intensive program. Is that under the integrated pre-K umbrella and it's like a section of it? Or is it all still kind of cohesive and woven in together?
So we call it an integrated preschool, right? Absolutely, because that's how we've been operating, that all of our services have been pushed in to the integrated preschool, or students have been pulled out for their services, that when they need to be out of that classroom environment. What we're finding is that no longer works because the services on their individual education program, the number of minutes and services has them out fully. And so it makes they're being pulled more time to get their services. So what we're saying is that they just need a separate program in order to get all of their services in the time that they need it. And they're not at a level that they're able to integrate fully, okay, with the peers in that classroom. Having a separate, what that allows for is opportunity though, say at snack time, for them to go in and have snack. So instead of them being in there and constantly pulling them out, they'll be in a program getting their services and going in when they're able and ready to do that in their time. So there's the difference. And we have not had that before, but we also haven't had the level of complexity as we do now and have identified, and why we're doing the program about, is these kids really need a substantially separate program. Similar to our programs as the kids go up, as the kids go up to middle school, we have, all of our programs up to the high school, where they're separate. They have their own program and their needs are met in that environment. And when there's opportunity to go interact with their peers or their peers come in, peer buddies, we can do that. So that's the difference.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. And I just repeat it back to make sure that I'm getting it. So there will be an intensive, what you're proposing is there will be an intensive program, and those children that require those services will remain in that intensive program for their time and then push into opportunities like lunch or snack time as they can. Additionally, there will be the traditional way that we've looked at integrated pre-K. That program will also be happening with students who still have IEPs and some specialized needs, but not as intense as that other group, and they will be integrated with community
Yes.
peer students.
Yes, and that's why you see the 6 sessions now moving into next year, because we need to create that intensive sub-separate program.
And so I'm wondering about the challenge that you said about community peers, and I can speak for myself. I have a child in Chatham who I would love to send him to this program and would be a community peer, but it's not, it doesn't make sense for me as a working parent to do that. And so I'm wondering, are you predicting and projecting that will it be hard to fill the community peer? I'm sorry, am I getting the term correct?
That's okay, that's community friend, peer,
Okay,
that's okay.
do you project or have any indication that it will be hard to fill those seats?
We haven't had difficulty in Harwich as much as we've had in Chatham. So we've been, and Mary can speak more to that. It was more when we looked at Chatham in isolation of being able to meet the, obligation of the ratios of students.
And so during COVID, the program was not offered to children who were the community friends. It was just offered for the students who needed services, correct?
Yes, we submitted a waiver to the state because we could not manage what was required at the time of the social distancing and of course the masking for many of those children. So we could not meet any of those requirements in that classroom setting. So we could not accommodate additional students for that COVID year.
And because you're seeing this increased complexity of the level of need of students and intensity of their needs, is there an option to just offer the intensive program and not offer the integrated program with community peers again, as it's as you're seeing it be an effect or a result of COVID?
No.
Okay.
So not at this time, because we don't have the same level of restrictions. So you can operate a substantially separate program because that meets the needs of the students, and that's an IEP decision. It's a team decision to make that placement. You cannot operate a integrated preschool without having that ratio of students receiving special education and peers. So you have to have that 49%, 51%. That's required. So we can't operate outside of that other than creating a program that meets students' needs differently.
I don't know. I don't think I heard or understood what you were saying exactly, or maybe my question wasn't clear. Is it like we did with COVID? Is there any sort of, you said you applied, or we applied to have a special?
A waiver.
A waiver.
A waiver of the required ratio of students. Yes.
And so that's not an option anymore to do that?
No, because we're not in a state of, the way what we were required to do in terms of, distancing, masking. We couldn't accommodate the number of students in that classroom in the distancing and manage the students with their needs and peers.
Okay.
So many preschools had to apply for a waiver because they couldn't ensure the safety of children that young, especially some of our more vulnerable kids in terms of wearing masks and those pieces. So no, there's not a waiver right now.
Okay.
The only time you can do a waiver, forgive me, that's wrong. The only time you can do a waiver is you can't meet the peer percentage. That's when you would have to get a waiver because you can't, like, for example, I want to say maybe Mashpee, and I think Jen will talk about that. They can't meet their peer requirement, so they have to submit a waiver saying we can't, do the 49-51. So yes, there is a condition that you can submit the waiver.
Thank you.
Mr. Russell?
Thanks, Madam Chair. A couple of questions again, I'm just trying to catch up, like all of us, I guess. As I look at this, your team, Melissa, you're sharing with us these options and trying to point out that someone's got to make a decision for next year, whether option one that has a separate program in Chatham would be that column, or the separate mirror program would be the Harwich preschool, or a system regional program to the far right. And yet, as I look at it, a couple of things strike me. One, you described that, forgetting the money down below, you've got a curriculum dilemma for the top issues because of delivery with some substantially separate youngsters blended in. You're having a challenge. How do we deliver the curriculum via the IEPs and the old days put 1s and 2s and 3s? That's one issue that you're turning. And as I understand it, the lower portion is the issue that says, which makes me think that without cutting too much to the chase, that it's sort of a mirror image as to what we're looking at Chatham Elementary regular ed youngsters, with the number of youngsters shrinking, and how it's saying, well, if I were Chatham dad, I'd want those 4 youngsters, one of them being mine, to stay in Chatham and go to school there and have a little program there. If that were to be able to be done by us, then that number coming down would reflect that 16,000.
Yes.
The further you go, well, gee whiz, if you can't do that, it must mean my one youngster out of the 4 would be bused or driven over to a unified program, the far right hand. That's where we are juggling. And of course, on the right hand side, the money that it takes to service the kids, I think speaks equally loudly as to what would be a delivery financially.
Yes.
So at least I think I understand, and without any real, because Danielle's point, and it struck me a week ago thinking of this, could you just pull out the substantially separate youngsters kids and service them without double teachers? One being very small section, and I think I heard you say, no, we can't do that. Thanks, Melissa.
Ms. Long,
Thank you, Melissa, and everyone. I just wanted to clarify, so the model for the school district, the far right, only have to add another 0.4 of a 0.8 FTE for that program, is that correct? To still have the correct ratio. And I'm assuming, I know on the side it says cost for related services provided, overhead materials, transportation isn't included. Do we have an idea of that number per student to add on? Not, obviously not right now, but do we have an idea of that, just where that comes into? You know, you're looking at another $1,000 per student. Do we have an idea of that? And if not, that's okay.
No, but we can definitely get that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's an important piece, because it is a factor when we're looking at and comparing these numbers. I guess my state would be, you know, thank goodness for inclusion and for this type of program, because it gives a lot of those other peers an opportunity to be in a regularly integrated classroom. So for that, I applaud this model because it's doing exactly what it should. And the kids in a class, having more peers in their classroom is just going to be more beneficial. So really interesting numbers, and thank you for sharing that.
Sure, and we have more to present, and at the end, we do have a recommendation.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm here to talk a little bit about what we have already in place at Chatham Elementary School. First of all, to let you know that if we were to bring the preschool back, we do have the space available to house a preschool program. We have the service providers available within our school that we could provide the services required of those students, with the exception of the severe or the intensive special needs, which Ms. McGuire talked about a little bit earlier. We also have in the budget proposal for next year, putting that extra 1.0 preschool teacher and the instructional assistant into the program. We project, as Ms. McGuire and Mrs. Oldback said, that there is going to be a need for an intensive preschool program at Chatham, in addition to just the integrated program. And that's based on the makeup of the students that we currently know about, and then what we're projecting coming in for February 2022. So our concerns are this: in order to provide an intensive preschool program, we would have to offer multiple sessions, 2 sessions, so 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. sessions. The students who would be enrolled in that intensive program would not have the opportunity to integrate with peers with only 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. session. So we really need to have those 4 sessions. And then based on our projected numbers, our marginalized students, or our students that are requiring services, are really going to still remain outnumbered and overshadowed by their neurotypical peers, which is against the whole model of integrated in the first place. We looked at some of the districts on Cape Cod to see what they were offering for preschool programs. Mashpee is a very similar district to ours in the fact that it's a similar size, and according to DESE, when we're looking at comparable districts, Mashpee is considered a comparable district to us. And as I was doing some research into this, I was really happy to find that their preschool director is actually my old psychologist from school I used to work at. So we had a nice little chat. She told me a little bit about their system. So they have 2 elementary schools. They have a preschool through grade 2 school, and then they have a grade 3 through grade 6 school. They have multiple 3-year-old programs. So they have 1 section of 2 days of half-day session. They have 1 section of 3 days a week at a half day, and 1 section of 4 days a week, half session. Each of those sessions has up to 15 students. And then they have 1 4-year-old program, which is full day, 5 days a week. And that can be up to 20 students. Their reasoning for having a full day program for their 4-year-olds is that they were really trying to make sure that they were prepared and building that resiliency and that stamina for integration into kindergarten the following year to be able to do a full day. She did mention, as Melissa referenced earlier, they are having great difficulty in finding those peer models for their programs. So that has been a huge pain in her side, she said, and something to think about for ourselves. And I think the half-day model really does not work for a lot of our working families. Moving on, we looked at Nauset, obviously a little bit larger than we are. They have 2 preschool programs, one at the Stony Brook School and one in Eastham at the elementary school. Both of those programs are 4 days and they're half-day sessions. They have 8 a.m. and p.m. sessions. And then Barnstable has its own learning center for students in ages 3 through 5. They offer a.m. and p.m. sessions and partial days. They offer extended day programs past the half-day mark for students that require those additional services based on their individual educational programs. So that's kind of what we learned about what's kind of going on around us. And it gave us a little clarity that we're on the right track, I think, here in Monomoy. So
Are you okay with the question?
Yes, please.
Ms. Long?
I just had one question, and it was not here, and it's probably the answer, but, the Nauset district, so that means Wellfleet and Orleans no longer have preschool programs?
Yes,
Okay, so they're bused or transported to whatever, they either choose Stony Brook or Eastham?
yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if they choose or if they're assigned.
Or they're
but
assigned, but, okay, all right, great, thank you.
They're able to go to.
They're able to go
They're just not
to.
housing pre-Ks anymore?
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Was there feedback on that from that, or was that just kind of?
I reached
Okay.
out and didn't get a lot of feedback. I spoke the most with, the person I knew. Which was
So do we know how long that's been, or?
in Nauset or?
Yeah, in that district, do we know how long this been?
I do not, I don't know.
I don't know either. That's all right, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Danielle.
Ms. Holly?
Thank you. I have a question, and these might be broader questions that, for us to maybe wrestle with outside of this conversation in the future, but I'm really intrigued by Mashpee's model of the full day, 5 days a week program for their 4-year-olds, and I'm wondering if there's any way that our district could hold that as something we move toward.
Well, I don't want to, I'm gonna hand off to Melissa, but I know this is something that we have begun speaking about, and part of our program evaluation piece this year is, but I'm gonna give that to you. That's your department, not mine.
That's okay. I think, it is a great model for 4-year-olds who are able to move into a full day program. Sometimes what you'll see is they'll start in a half day and then they'll move to a full day. And it really is thinking about preparing them for kindergarten. Mind you that there are many schools that have half day kindergarten as well, and not necessarily full day kindergarten. So we have full day kindergarten, so we're very fortunate in that. But part of our program evaluation is looking at effectiveness of our program, efficiency of our program, and of course, cost of our program. That's how you evaluate. So yes, that would be part of that evaluation, is looking at all the different models beyond just these 3 districts, looking at really and who are all of our students, and really trying to project, given what we have gone through the past year, what it might look like moving forward. So yes, that would be something that we would take a look at.
And one other question, again, this is maybe a broader question, but it strikes me as, hearing tonight that filling those seats at the N+1 model is really, really hard to get those numbers in, and hearing it from another district like Mashpee that's considered comparable to us in the eyes of Dusty. I'm wondering, is there any sort of opportunity to reevaluate or shift that model, or is that like a state law? Are there opportunities to, I guess, maybe examine that model of space, filling seats as we think about our program?
That is a regulation. So that comes right out of the early childhood special education. So the ECSE, which is the acronyms you see, but that comes right out of the regulations requirement. And that's why you have to submit a waiver, because now you're not, adhering to the regulation. There's lots of conversations at the early childhood level right now. Lots of conversation about funding, about just the regulations in general. I know part of the policy fellowship I'm doing with Rennie Center, that is actually a very heavy policy that they're looking at for these exact questions that you're asking. So there is lots of talk out there about early childhood, but remembering early childhood primary goal is to service children with special education needs. So, and I think sometimes we forget that, because it's not required. Preschool is not required, but servicing students at age 3 that have disabilities is required. So how do we do that in the most meaningful way while educating our youngest population, moving into, preparing them for kindergarten? So they're great questions.
Thank you.
All right, I was gonna say drum roll for the recommendation. All right, as I just spoke about a few minutes ago, really what we look at anytime we're making a recommendation is what is effective, what is efficient, and are we being fiscally responsible? So when we're looking at effectiveness, we're going in efficiency and fiscal responsibility. We are recommending, as the team supporting the programs, a regional preschool program. I'm going to explain in detail why we're moving this way, or why we're making this recommendation. First of all, effectiveness is certainly looking at maintaining the appropriate levels of service. I have people coming from Boston. I have people coming from Cambridge. I have people coming with a specialty license that are servicing multiple of our students in our preschool. So when I think of, effective and efficient, I need to make sure there's appropriate levels of services. So that's one. Maintaining flexible grouping to best meet the needs. When I talk about flexible grouping, when we look at the 4 sessions or the 6 sessions moving forward, we have to look at students, how are their needs going to be met in this session, this session, this session, or this session? What peers are in there? What other student has similar needs that when we can group them together for occupational therapy, speech therapy, what we do know, research says that group therapy is far more effective than individual therapy. right? Because kids are learning together. And then we're able to match them up with the appropriate peers based on their skill level. So that's what maintaining flexible grouping means. Ability to provide an intensive preschool program for our most vulnerable students. We've talked about that quite a bit tonight. That kind of alarmed us this year when we said, we don't have the program right now. We have kids coming that we do not have a program for them. We're servicing them, but are we servicing them appropriately? No, because we're pulling them out constantly. So they're not even in the program, I mean, in the integrated, session to begin with. A comprehensive evaluation and placement. So in terms of our ability to comprehensively evaluate the team evaluation. Moving a team between two places is very, very difficult to coordinate because you have to remember we have speech and OT and PT that travel across the buildings. We struggle right now just to meet those needs because of the number of students that have to be served in other buildings. So now if I'm pulling apart those students, I'm going to have a very difficult time with my comprehensive team to evaluate it in a timely manner. Looking at efficiency, the coordination of services and related service providers. That in itself is a nightmare. It's what I dread every year when I sit down with all the speech and OT and PT and everybody to say, okay, what's your schedule look like? How are we going to make sure every student has a slot? So as you start to move programs around like that, especially with the most intensive kids, it makes it very difficult to schedule those service providers. Efficiency in terms of greater opportunities to group our students, as I talked under the effectiveness part, really making sure we are putting kids together with the most appropriate groups of students in their class. Greater inclusion opportunities for our most vulnerable students. We don't have that if we have a separate program in each town because there's just not enough students to be able to provide that level of opportunity. Professional learning community. Have you all met preschool teachers? They're a different breed of cat. And I am telling you, their level of creativity, I'm telling you, they can pick up a piece of dust and make something out of it. But their ability to work together, learn together, build programs together is amazing. What we see is when we pull teams apart like that, they lose that opportunity to build and strengthen what they're doing in their preschool program. And finally, the efficiency of our shared resources. As I said, never mind all the related service providers, but all the other folks that are in the building that they get to share, like our BCBA, our nurses and their level of training with those intensive kids. And then finally, just looking at the fiscal responsibility. We looked at what it's costing per student if we separate out the program. So for all these reasons, we are recommending a regional preschool program to best meet the needs of our students. That is that.
Ms. Long?
That's the answer. I kind of like it. Question for you is how does, so Danielle brought up a great point, and that's about, full day care for the working parent, something that's desperately needed. And obviously the pre-K program, not a necessity, but for children in our special needs population absolutely is. How does the YMCA program in Harwich work for preschool age children? Like, are we attached, are we connected at all? Like after this half-day program, is there any type of integration? Is there any type of services that the child who goes to our integrated preschool program could then do the YMCA for an extended day?
Mary can
I think
speak
things
more
are-
to that. The only thing, we have an MOU, and
Yep.
that's really tied into special education.
Yep.
Through Child Fund. So if there's students in the YMCA, we're responsible to evaluate and determine eligibility and then provide services. So that's that piece. But in terms of additional, Mary can speak to that.
So the YMCA actually has 3 rooms in Harwich Elementary. There's an infant toddler program. There are 2 preschool rooms, one of which does have a program. I believe the hours are 7:30 to 5:30. And the second preschool room actually right now is not operational because they simply can't staff it. And they do not take students unless the family is committing to the full day. So we do not have kids that go from our integrated preschool to the Y, and that's just the way the Y operates. Yeah.
So if we have a student who's a community member in Harwich, let's say a traditional peer, their choice is to be in the half-day integrated preschool program at Harwich Elementary, which they can do,
Right.
no cost. Or they can choose to do the YMCA program at fee, which would potentially give them full day care.
So there is tuition for community peers.
Oh, excuse me.
There is. It's
I forgot about that piece.
yeah, 150 a month, and it's
Okay.
a sliding scale, which is reflective of financial need.
So they can opt to do that, or they could opt to do, so we do, in a way, support a full day program by having the YMCA at Harwich Elementary. That's a potential opportunity for someone who needed that full day care.
Absolutely. I mean, there are Harwich and Chatham families in the preschool in the Y in our building. But the YMCA preschool does not accept kids for anything less than a full day. So I just want to be clear.
Yep.
To my knowledge, they have not accommodated kids traveling. Scott?
They have, so,
I guess I'm right.
There we go.
yeah, so, and we, we have some, like, over, I mean, if we look long term, we had at one point a preschool program over at Harwich Elementary called Midway for Kids. So if kids needed the services, they were just able to walk down the hall, or teacher would walk them down the hall. So they got their services. They didn't have to go somewhere else. It was all sort of able to happen in the building. We have had kids, so while we don't have kids at the moment that are taking advantage of the Y program at Harwich Elementary School, in past years, we have had kids that were part of the YMCA program that's operating out of Cape Tech, that were actually bused over to be part of our program to get services. So there is that capability. It's just a lot easier for families if it's down the hall. And I know when my kids were much younger and one of my kids was getting early intervention services, we had to, they were in a private setting, and once a week I had to go and pick up a child and bring the child to the school to get, to get speech language services. So it just, there's a convenience factor if a family is there that they can access the service. It's not an either or. The law really makes it, compels us to go and provide those services and find a way to support the child.
Right, but to Mary's point, it's been my impression of the YMCA program at Harwich that the slots are primarily filled by full-time students, and that's their commitment.
Right.
They were not as flexible as we thought originally about taking students after their program was done.
I think.
And to come and go as they please, kind of, like,
Right.
oh, I don't need you today, oh, I do need you today. And that's what we first thought it was going to work like, and it's not working that way.
With the signing up for this week, I need Tuesday, Thursday. Next month, my schedule changes. I need Monday, Wednesday.
Right.
They do try to work with families and work that through, particularly with COVID, with our first responders and the schedules. But to be clear, if a student is an special education student who could easily go to the Y program, but to my knowledge, I believe they would be paying possibly the full tuition. Perhaps the Y makes some accommodation for that, but they do like their families to commit to 5 a day. They can choose any of the 5 days, but they want them to commit completely to that schedule, so they can staff it.
Right. It's all coming back to me when we started talking about that. We had the program at Chatham Elementary too at the same time. And unfortunately, that only lasted a year, but it was like a pilot, I believe.
Yeah.
But, and or actually, I think they closed down. But anyway, comes back to me, and I remember hearing from parents that it wasn't as advertised or wasn't as easy to use as we had thought it was. So to me, I look at a menu and I'm like, all right, well, I can put my kid in the Y program and have full day care 5 days a week, because I know I'm gonna work 5 days a week, all day from 8 to 5. Or I can put my child in the integrated preschool program, which is also excellent, but those are half day sessions. So that's a decision you have to make, but we are actually eventually, housing programs that it's not shut down, like they're not maxed at numbers, correct?
No.
So, okay, great, thank you.
Sharon, I see your hand up. Oh, you have to unmute.
She's so tiny.
Sorry.
Thank you. So I am hearing what Jackie's saying, and it's actually very correct that we expected something very much more flexible from the Y. And I also understand, of course, that they need to plan to have staffing. But I'm wondering, I'm not thinking of the medically fragile children because I'm not sure that would be appropriate. But for the preschool children, well, all right, let me just say this. When is our negotiations, or when is our contract up with the Y? It was a 5-year plan a few years ago, but I've lost track of what.
The way we have it is we can go and have conversations with them about the contract and how we move forward. It's, so there's not a long-term installment thing.
Okay, so it's, I think maybe up in 2 years or something, but I mean, I know that negotiations generally happen more towards that time, but it sounds like you're saying, Scott, that they're agreeable to negotiate things. It sounds like the preschool is predictable, and it's 4 days a week, not 5, but and I don't know if we have a need for it, but if we do have a need for it with the preschool, I think it would be worthwhile to talk with them about it, because I know our primary goal of schools is not to be here to help parents to work, but certainly if their parents are working and having money, it helps the whole family, including the student. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ms. Tolly?
Thank you. I have a couple questions about the program evaluation of this year that you mentioned is currently in process. I'm very curious because I know Chatham residents are very concerned about maintaining programs at Chatham Elementary School. And there were, some folks were upset last year when it all went over to Harwich. And so I'm thinking about Chatham families who have children who have who will be those intense needs children, and how they will feel, or what their experience will be like, going to a different town, as Terry mentioned. I would imagine they might prefer to have a house, or, educate their child in place in Chatham. And I'm wondering, when you're going through the evaluation process of the current program, how is feedback being collected from parents and families of this program, in particular Chatham families who are entering into Harwich for the program? So that's one question. And then my other question is, when will the program evaluation be complete?
So parents, actually all stakeholders are included in a program evaluation. So we elicit feedback from parents, guardians, caregivers, staff, teachers, everybody. So that's included. It will be the end of the year because it does take some time to look at, because you have to do a whole research piece on it first, similar to what Ms. Kelly did. It's not just but we really need to research all of the various models, the effectiveness of those models, the cost of those models. So that comes part of the evaluation. And then we have to have multiple observations with inter-rater reliability on the program services that are delivered. We have to look at all of the grid services. There's a lot that goes into it. So it'll take us the rest of the year to finish that. We'll have some outside folks coming in, providing feedback to our programs, observing our programs. So there's quite a bit, but there is a lot of feedback that we elicit from our communities.
And will we receive a presentation on that evaluation, or how will the school?
Absolutely. Because I enjoy presenting.
We enjoy seeing you.
So,
Can I ask?
oh, sorry. Ms.
Yeah,
Davis.
just a quick question, kind of feeding off of what Danielle said. So I'm just going to assume that the reason this whole, the modified or the MRSD preschool is because that the needs haven't been identified enough in Chatham to justify. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, they have been identified, and because they've been identified, we can't create a program.
Okay.
So because, and again, I'm very cognizant of, there's very few Chatham children, so for me to provide more information,
Right, I get that.
I worry
Okay, so, all
about
right.
that. So, but with the children that would be in Chatham, they wouldn't be together. So I can say that. So when you think about four children, if they're not going to be together, that does not make a lot of sense.
Okay. All right.
So,
One other question, I'm sorry,
Oh,
just one
go
other
ahead.
quick question, just for clarification for myself. So at Harwich Elementary School, I believe there's an autism, and I might not have the right name of it, but there's an autism program, but that's elementary, is that correct?
So that particular program supports pre-K through 4.
Oh, it does, okay.
So that became our other issue, is what was happening is the students in the preschool where the numbers increased in the intensity, that was the only program we had to service them, and that is completely inappropriate. And those numbers are way too large. And that's what provoked us to say, we need another preschool intensive special need program. Because you can't have first of all, you can't have preschool to grades 4, the number of students. So we have to get a waiver for that. If we are, putting kids in over 48 months in a program together. So that's where our struggle is. We're like, we need to have this program for our preschool kids. And K, because we can certainly have preschool and K. So there's an efficiency in servicing some of our intensive K students as well from that program in a more appropriate setting.
Okay, thank you. And I did tour almost 3 years ago, all of these, what you're talking about. So I did visually see it, but that was a little under 3 years ago. Yeah.
Dr. Carpenter?
Just to kind of loop us also back to conversations we had last week on budget costs and the preliminary assessments, and if you recall the number that Chatham would potentially be taking on if there was a shift in the regional agreement that had the town pay for its own elementary school. We had it put into that initial budget of one preschool teacher, one support staff. So that number, if we were to seek a Monomoy Regional School District integrated preschool that's happening over at Harwich Elementary School, where essentially we have negligible staffing that we're adding, but we're able to meld the kids into that program without additional cost. There's $103,000 that we're carrying in the budget for the teacher and the teaching assistant that wouldn't need to be absorbed. So that large number that we're saying, okay, child, you're going to have to pick up this if we were to tweak the regional agreement, shrinks. If we have the way that Jen, Mary, and Melissa presented tonight, is if we do put in an intensive needs program on top of a preschool at Chatham Elementary School, there's another one teacher or 2 teaching assistants for the intensive for that intensive program. So that would take that number that we were seeing for last school committee meeting, I've actually inflated that for Chatham by another $127,000. So there's an impact to what, what the budget is for Chatham Elementary School. So is there an integrated preschool, is there an integrated preschool and an intensive needs programs that's there. So this does, at the end of the day, fold back into budget conversations, and it gets down to assessment conversations. And we're just trying to kind of keep at least the focus on like what would a program look like and what makes sense for a program, knowing that there are budget implications.
Can I ask a question? So,
Jenny, we're calling you.
we're talking about February, right? These kiddos are starting to roll in February, so we're needing to think about this now. This is not for next September.
So that's a great point. So what we've done, because we know as of February, those are our numbers. So we have already posted for an intensive preschool teacher. It doesn't remotely include February to June. And we have until the last day of school to begin a program for a 3-year-old at their birthday. So those numbers could shift again.
But in February or for September?
March, April, May, June. We'll have more kids coming into our program.
Okay. So it needs to happen now.
That has to happen now,
Not,
regardless.
okay.
Yes.
So it's within this year. This topic.
So that actually leads to another, or connects to a question that I had is, I'm hoping and wondering if then there will be another, I don't know if it would be that full evaluation process that you're going through again this year for that chunk of the February through June. But when we're talking about next school year, are you proposing at this time that we would stay with the regionalized integrated pre-K program, or will that be another conversation that we will have?
We're recommending this moving forward into September. We have to service those needs now, but looking at the numbers and the trajectory of our students and the historical numbers in Chatham versus Harwich, we're recommending moving forward for next year, the regional program, because we don't know how we would, quite frankly, manage it otherwise.
And then what does that mean for beyond next year? Will there be another conversation about what the preschool program looks like? Or is this kind of, if we go down this road of regionalizing the preschool program next year, is that the track that we're on for the foreseeable future of 2, 3, 4, 5 years? I'm curious, I'm frankly concerned that if we do this, we are saying goodbye to preschool at Chatham Elementary.
I think I mean, honestly, it's a conversation we have monthly. And that's because we have to constantly plan. We have to prepare for the future. And because so much of it is unknown, we still have to plan appropriately. So I don't think there's ever a time where we're going to say we're never talking about what it might look like, because there might be a time when we need to open another program. Similar to the past several years, we have actually developed multiple programs in each of the buildings to service the various needs, of our students. So, there in Chatham, we had the SEAL program, which was for students with intensive special needs. All those students have now moved to the middle school and, are in our program at the middle school. There were no intensive special needs students that came up into Chatham, so we don't have that program anymore. We have 2 programs at Harwich Elementary. We created a very specific program for students with social emotional needs. So we were able to create that there. The economy of scale and the size of our student body in Harwich and the size of the student body in Chatham, you don't have the economy of scale and the same level of needs, because there just aren't as many students. So those are conversations we have every year.
That means then this is not closing the door to a future preschool program at Chatham.
Well-
Indefinitely, the program is always being evaluated based on the current needs of the students who are showing up.
Yes, and that's the same for all, that's, all of our programs. That's kind of the point I was making, is that we have to always look at what are the needs of our students in our district, and making sure we have the right programs to meet their needs.
I understand that, and I think it's really important that, that residents of both towns understand that as well. So thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Russell?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just follow up with Danielle. Melissa, that's a good point. I think based on the sensitivity of both towns, what we're going through, it's nice to have a yearly breakdown similar to this, for those who are paying attention in Harwich and Chatham, to say, I may not agree, but I see what your point is. For example, as I get to that next to last page, and it jumps out, and it's logical. Nauset Regional Schools, they have 2,300 kids. Their programs are housed at Stony Brook and Eastham. That means there are 3 villages that put their youngsters in need on some sort of bus or transport, and drives to one or the other based on geography probably to those. So those folks in Truro, Eastham, not Eastham, but Wellfleet and say, gee, how come? I'd like to have. Take Barnstable, which is town, it's not a region, but it has 7 villages. And they've decided to take me to Cloud Early Center, which I know where it is physically. And all of the youngsters, all of those 7 villages, Quid, Liano, Tuit, Hyannis, if their youngsters qualify based on need, they're bused to that center. And I'm sure a lot of moms and dads say, great, or wouldn't it be nicer if it's in the village I happen to live in? So it's not that it's a twist of fate, I guess, but it's nothing really that unusual that most towns would say, let's review it every year. And for example, why I mentioned earlier, if there are 4 youngsters in Chatham, that's the discussion. How does one have a duplicate program at 3 times the cost when there are only those numbers servicing? So it makes you start to think, maybe we're going to centralize. That's what this whole issue is about. Not going to won't satisfy everybody, but reminds me of several years ago, talking about the regulator at the Chatham Elementary School setting with 3 sections and 2 sections. And there was a pool of folks saying, well, couldn't parents have a choice to say, for example, let's say in Chatham, based on demographics, my 3rd grader has 9 classmates. That's wonderful, that's terrific. So let that be the small school experience and how our kids can go there. Well, the argument, or the issue I raised years ago is, well, it really isn't able to be handled that way because of all of the elementary teachers at Harwich Elementary who are given 19 students every year. You'll have a class grievance faster than make your head spin when they find out not just one year that's freakish and we walk through that, but for every year, there's some Chatham classrooms that have, and I'm slightly exaggerating, 9 or 10 students versus the other, but I'm getting paid the same salary to teach them. So those are some of the things that got to be sensitive when you start to move towards 2, and can you imagine if you get 4 elementary schools?
Yes.
And just another example, I was in Shrewsbury for 8 years and I had 5 elementary schools. None of them had a preschool or a kindergarten. There was an early childhood. So there was a dedicated building for both pre-K and K. And when we looked at really, again, the efficiency and effectiveness of teaching within that grade level and servicing the students, especially our most vulnerable, that was the most effective way to prepare our students for their experiences going, into their elementary schools. There are many examples like that, as Ms. Russell just talked about. When you look at these districts, you see that there's a central preschool often to service the needs of many, because otherwise it would be few in the individual schools.
Okay, so
Madam Chair, can I ask oh, I'm sorry, can I ask, it's the mask, you probably didn't recognize.
I didn't.
Can I ask a question? This might, and please tell me if this is not the appropriate time, but I'm just a little curious, because I went straight to the regional agreement. Thank you, for bringing up your comments, Superintendent. And I was just wondering, when you read page, well, I guess this may or may not be the right time for this, but page 4 in the regional agreement, it does say at the committee's discretion, including pre-kindergarten. So it reads to me that because I think going back to Danielle's question and her concern about losing preschool at Chatham Elementary School, I think that our committee has the discretion at any point in time, right, to determine if there's a preschool needed. It's not like we're going to get rid of it. It reads at our discretion. So I just wanted to point that out. That's how I read it anyway. And I just wanted to clarify. If I need to clarify, does it make sense? Okay. So it's not going away. So I think I just wanted to say that publicly, that it's not like it's ever going away, because it's right here on page 4. So it's always going to be at our discretion to always be evaluated.
So we need to vote on this, but
Yeah,
not
that's
tonight. Our next meeting is January 6th. Is that
Yes.
okay?
What it is.
Sure.
Okay. So if there's no further discussion or questions, we will put this on the January 6th. We'll bring this back to the January 6th meeting to have a vote.
I believe yes.
Yes. All right.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you all, do a great
Thank
job.
you.
Sure. I'm gonna stay right
And
up there.
Melissa, you're gonna hang tight because I believe you are going to talk about our long-term instructional assistant substitute position proposal.
Yes, hi, Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services. As you know, we are struggling greatly with filling positions, with employing substitutes. And one of our positions, which is the instructional assistant, which is incredibly important to servicing our students in our special education program, we're finding we're just not able to attract enough people. And what we'd like to propose is similar to the long-term sub for teachers, is to create a long-term sub for instructional assistants, which would bump the pay rate up a little bit and perhaps be more attractive so that we could get folks to sub. So if you look at the grid, it gives you kind of the breakdown that it would be at step 1 for the non-certified staff, but it does bump it up so that it could be more attractive. So we're seeking a motion to approve the creation of a long-term substitute instructional assistant rate to be paid at step 1 of the non-certified instructional assistant pay scale.
Any discussion? Ms. Long?
My only question, I was just kind of checking with the chair, is that typically we would hear this and then we would vote on it at our next meeting. So just to have a little time to process. I'm always the one that puts this out. Always a stickler. But typically, yeah, this would be a presentation and then we would vote on it for an action item for the following meeting. But it would be up to the chair and the committee that unless someone had a problem with that, we wouldn't do that. But I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the committee because if I didn't, then it would be trouble.
I'm gonna go with Ms. Stout on the Zoom room and then Mr. Russell.
I don't really have a problem with that, except that when I'm looking at the fuller handout that you gave us, it says that it would be $126.95, and that would be only if they were appointed, I guess, for the rest of the year or at least 20 days or more. Now, when I look at the teachers, they do have a higher thing for appointed for 20 days or more, but the teacher salaries for anything less than that, from 1 day to 20 days is a good for, $13 less a day than the assistant. And I'm just wondering, because most of our substitute teachers are there for less than 20 days, if they're going to feel badly getting paid less than some of the teacher assistants. I know we've had trouble in the past getting substitute teachers, and I just don't want to cause any problem about that. So I don't know what the solution is, but that's something that sticks out for me.
I'm not clear on the question. I see you're looking at the difference between the teacher long-term sub, and both are, if they're going to be appointed in the same position for more than 20 days. Is that,
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
If I'm only looking at the salary for the pace for the more than 20 days or full-time teacher compared to non-certified, it looks fine. It looks absolutely fine. I'm just wondering, since we have generally had difficulty getting substitute teachers, if we're going to see some balking at that they're getting a less pay, even though they would be comparing themselves to assistants that were working for at least 20 days or more in the same position. But the day from day 1 to day 20, teacher would, if they filled in, and which is almost all the substitutes, would be earning less than a teacher assistant. And the teachers would have masters and the assistants might have bachelor. I mean, they could have anything, but it could be a 2-year degree. Is that correct?
It's very rare that we get a master's level substitute, in all honesty, for teaching.
Really? I've
Oftentimes,
got a lot of teachers that retired substitutes.
yeah, we're not seeing, a significant amount of that level, but, that the day-to-day versus the long-term, when we're expecting them to do far more versus in one day, they're picking
Yes.
up a plan and, you're not certainly teaching the level of curriculum for that a long-term sub that is really expected to teach, to grade, to assess. There's a big difference in the expectation for that. So
I totally agree with that, Melissa. I know that there's a huge difference. So I don't object to this. I'm just saying, I'm hoping it doesn't set off something. That's all.
and my hope would be that those same people might also apply for our long-term subs, the instructional assistant positions as well, because they are long-term, and we probably have more of those that are available for subs as well. So that could be kind of a counter to that.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Mr. Russell?
Minor point, Melissa, I fully agree with it. The only clarity I might like to begin, and it probably is already here. We as a school committee and leadership team have just concluded negotiations with the custodians and the cafeteria workers. And I wonder if those figures you're giving here, step 1, step 2, step 3, within about a week, that wouldn't want to ratify, but they've agreed tentatively to it. With those figures at first blush, I think we've agreed to something higher than those, which would be fine, but at least if this is to be going in effect immediately, then that's there, I guess. But if we're going to start next September, those numbers would all change.
Correct.
Let's say July.
And I think for the purpose of this one, it's only to vote on the long-term sub for instructional assistant, not to impact any other. It was more for a comparison of what's already here, but what we're asking for is not a change in any of these, but only a change to create a long-term sub for instructional assistant.
I've just been corrected by our superintendent, so hopefully I withdraw my question.
So without objection, are we okay to vote on this tonight, or does anyone have an objection that we need to hold off until our next meeting? All right, no objection, so do I have a motion? Ms. Long,
I move to approve the creation of a long-term substitute instructional assistant rate to be paid at step 1 of a non-certified instructional assistant pay schedule as presented in your packet.
And I'll second.
all right, so I need a roll call vote. Ms. Scout,
Aye.
Ms. Polly,
Aye.
Ms. James,
Aye.
Ms. Rogers,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
and Ms. Zebrat Long.
Aye.
And I am an aye, so that is unanimous.
Thank you so much. Our
Thank you so
teachers are very grateful.
All right, so moving on to the regional agreement proposal focused on the financial changes only. And Dr. Carpenter, are you speaking?
Sure. So we had spoken at our last meeting that the feedback we got from both towns is maybe focusing just on the financial pieces might make the most sense to sort of clarify what the proposed revisions are that we would be taking to town meeting with the intent in a subsequent year to go back and do the cleanup of the wording in the regional agreement. So my crack administrative assistant, Ms. Tambolio, was working on the red line edition and bringing me the red line copy. I decided I really hate red lines, and it was just like it was really getting to the point unreadable. And so I decided at some whim to just take the original regional agreement, just say, why don't we, as we talked about before, we have the original copy, we have the red line copy, we have the cleaned up copy after the red line copy, and it's like, why don't we just take the original and where we're changing it, just line it up and say, it's on the same piece of paper. Here's what it was, here's what we're saying. So we've done that in this document, and then added some strategic text boxes to just have short explanations on this is what's changing in this section and why, or if it's not changing, to try to clarify it. And then for the artistic and editorial skills of Ms. Jordan, we have a little one-pager to couple to said document to just kind of in one page say what we're trying to accomplish here. As I'm just presenting this for just for feedback or thoughts, but I have also sent this one document to Mark Terry, who's having conversations with Bessie and making sure that, again, we've gotten their feedback, so we're just trying to make sure that this approach, that just focus on finances, that they're okay, and make sure that there is also a new commissioner sign off page, and, so I think we've done what they've asked. We just again are checking for understanding that everybody's on board, that Bessie's on board with sort of a two-step process of finance first, cleanup at a subsequent town meeting. So so he is going back and presenting said document to Bessie, and we should hopefully have have some feedback back from them by our next meeting on whether or not, we'll say, all the signatory parties are on board with the approach. But this is just trying to have one clean document so that no one will ever be traumatized by having to read the red line anymore.
Ms. Gates.
First of all, thank you for your work on this. This was a lot of work, so I appreciate it very much. And just for Jessica, Mark Terry is our attorney, our school committee attorney. So just, you'll hear his name tossed around a little bit. And we're also, or at least on the Harwich side, we're scheduled to present this on the 4th, I think. Has Chatham, just out of curiosity, made the same request?
Not yet, but again, what I was also trying to do was to have, if we're going to be presenting on the fourth to be able to distribute to those who are at the virtual forum or, in advance, that here's something that is actually legible that you can see, and to then use this as the basis of, here's what was in existence, here's where what the proposed change is. So really just providing the talking points of a little, I think that the little clarifying boxes become sort of the flow of that presentation conversation.
Thank you.
Ms. Holly?
Thank you for this new visually appealing version. It is so helpful. Everybody has different learning styles. I'm a visual learner, and I know a lot of other folks are as well. And so this I really appreciate. I feel like this is so much easier to wrap one's head around and understand. And I think this is a really great job. So thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate that. And I think I hope it'll be a very effective tool in moving this process forward. I love this too. I think this was really great. Thank you, Ms. Jordan. I have one, I hope it's a constructive feedback point about it. And I'm kind of wearing my development fundraising hat in my professional world. When I see this, I think what we're actually doing is we're asking to kind of the Chatham folks to raise some money, right? There's an element of we're asking them to put forth more money, so we're asking them to extend their resources, and I think language can be really critical to bringing people on board with that idea or making people kind of resistant to that idea. And I wonder about the why language that's on here to address the financial inequities between Chatham Elementary School and Harwich Elementary School due to declining enrollment in Chatham Elementary. This is it just came to me. I don't have any perfect answers right now, but I'm wondering if there might be some different language about the why that could be phrased so that Chatham folks actually might feel excited or empowered to say yes to this. When I read this, there's it's a little bit of like wah wah, declining enrollment at Chatham Elementary School. It's kind of a downer of a phrase. And so I wonder if there's a way to wordsmith this a little bit to have it be sort of an energizing call to action for both towns to problem solve together. And like I said, I don't know what those words would be, but that was just something that stood out to me. Like I said, wearing my development hat. So I just offered that for feedback to take or leave.
Any other comments, questions? Oh,
I was just saying, just general, ideas on, this is a draft, and we were shooting around, and I was toying with, say, declining enrollment, say, size discrepancies between the two, but I definitely get it. I just wasn't able to come up with that exciting piece too at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I do for a living, and it's hard.
If you have one, let me know.
Well, I'll, if it's all right, I'll spend some time mulling it over a little bit, and if anything comes to mind, I'll send it out.
Really welcome. More minds the
All
merrier.
right.
so I believe we're looking to vote on approving this. Go to.
Mar-
Oh, sorry, Sharon, I didn't see your hand.
Yes, I'm sorry. And excuse me, it could have been answered. A little bit of the audio I couldn't hear, but I remember that sometimes there's been some criticism about the people that did the original regional agreement not having the foresight to know every possible thing that could come up, and so I'm just thinking about that. And I I'm not sure if I heard Tina. I wanted to know if this was vetted, because it looks perfectly fine to me. But I wondered if somebody that has more experience with all this has looked at it. And I'm not sure if Tina said the lawyer did or anyone else did. I didn't hear it, that's all.
Yes.
We talked
I think, do you mind?
No, sure.
Sharon, I think your question is, has Mark Terry looked at it? Is that your question?
Or anyone that might have more background in this.
Yes, the answer is yes. Yes,
Okay.
we
Not
vetted.
the one pager, but the.
Yeah, actually, the changes to the regional agreement, he's looked at. Is that your question?
Yes, I was just hoping that somebody that had a lot of looking to the future, because right now this looks perfectly fine. I can't imagine all the possibilities that could eventually ever come up, but this does look fine. All right, that's fine. I think that's the best answer I can get. Thank you.
So we're looking to approve this to bring to the Board of Selectmen?
I guess what I'm seeking is just, is sort of this and the approach, what the committee would greenlight be, being the basis of our, of our presentation, and that we're moving forward a finance-only approach. And that, that the public presentation that we would do with the selectmen on the 4th, because we aren't coming back together prior to the 4th, that this is what you essentially you'd like to see, or if this isn't what you'd like to see, to get some clarity from you as to what you'd like to see, including any other fancy wording on motivated wording.
Ms. Gaines?
Oh, thank you. I saw Jackie's answer. I thought she was gonna be ahead of me, but I'll jump in. Since you called. So I just wanted to I guess to my Chatham colleagues to make sure, I guess as we're looking at the wording, because Chatham Elementary School, Chatham wants to keep the elementary school. So that's the why. And then Harwich is pushing back on it because the lower the enrollment goes, the more Harwich is paying. So I think it's important, and it's not really on here, but I do believe, and I'll just leave it up to my Chatham colleagues, because I think that is the issue in Chatham. They want to keep their elementary school. Totally get that. And at the same time, Harwich says, but we don't want to keep paying more and more for it. So that's where we're meeting in the middle, however that can be articulated. But so everybody gets a win. So Harwich is getting what they're asking for with the financial help, and then Chatham's keeping the elementary school. So however we can articulate that.
Ms. Retloff?
Well, one was, Scott, you're asking if we're okay with this format. Okay. Second is I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and. Chatham wants to keep its elementary school, and Harwich does not want to continue to pay.
Yes,
There's a big
absolutely.
difference by saying or and and.
Oh, did I say or? If I did, I apologize.
No, you
Oh.
were saying it, but that's okay. It's loosely interpreted, but
Yeah.
I've learned actually even from this Scott that when you say and instead of or, it doesn't make one feel like it's a choice, but it's more of a conversation. So it kind of brings a negative connotation to it. So it's an and, you're gonna do this, and this is what's going to happen, or and this is the other thing we're working on. But I also think that it has to be very prominently known on this flyer that Chatham wants its own elementary school, and it's going to cost a lot more money for Chatham to do that. So, and that's where we really need to be transparent with the public. That it's not just you're getting your own elementary school, there's a lot more that goes along with it. So, and money isn't all of it either. So I would love it if someone could support Joy, and so that we don't keep throwing her out there, who has some really good ideas. Looking at you. And really kind of help format something. It shouldn't have to be a huge project, but transparent, and right out there.
Mr. Russell.
As Jackie said, there are two issues that we need to move on. And I think we chatted enough about this tonight because amongst us, we're not going to come up with the most exciting statement. It's going to take some person serious to kind of revise. Personally, I think it says it all. So I'm very satisfied with this is the message for anyone who's up to around a reading level is, without really getting into, wow, I'm so accepted that Harwich has tossed the ball to us. So I'm comfortable with this, but I would
Write
urge
that down.
anyone who's, because that age has privilege. I would urge anyone who wants, Chatham, to doctor it up, but I set a deadline of 2 days or 3 days to get that. In the meantime, I would make a motion that the 18th revision of the regional agreement as submitted this evening, that we vote to approve it, to submit to the select board, etc.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Ms. Seabright Long?
Just for our admin to strike the 18th edition, because I don't actually know if it's the actual 18th
No.
edition.
Oh, yeah.
in the motion.
All right,
Just throw a number down arbitrarily.
Yes, yes, good point.
roll call vote. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Tolly?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Vote aye.
And Ms. Seabright Long?
Aye.
And I am an aye. Okay, moving on. So I attended the Cape Cod Collaborative annual review meeting this month, and it was a lot of information that they shared on everything that they've done over the year. That we have a representative, we have an opportunity to have a representative from our committee join their meetings and be part of their board. So Mr. Osceola was that representative. So I'm wondering if there's no objection, if I could appoint Ms. Rogers to be that representative for the remainder of this term, since he was that. So if there's any discussion or questions. And then I know we talked about, well, we're just gonna leave it at that. Do we need to vote on that, or because I'm the chair, I just appointed?
I think as the chair, you can appoint.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have appointed you, Ms. Rogers.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to setting a date for the budget workshop. So Michael, Mr. McMillan talked about that at our last meeting. But with him not here, do you have dates, Dr. Carpenter, that he's suggesting, or?
I think he was just wondering, is the group able to settle on a date so we can, and also I think the intent of the budget workshop, as Michael and I have thought about it, is really to let the admin team know. So I think what we would like to have is, have Mary come and just, we imagine that it would take 2-ish plus hours to have each principal sort of talk about what was behind their budget requests and things that they still, in looking out into the future, hope to achieve budgetarily in the same, so it's because when we go and put together a budget, it's Michael, Melissa, and I and Mark sitting, listening to each principal come in and talk about their budget, and the athletic director and Jim Birchfield, director of technology. So it's to give you a chance to at least get the short, version of all of that at once, and maybe just help, particularly with some new school committee members too, to just help everybody get a better feel for the budget.
I mean, I'm excited to have that opportunity. I don't know, I mean, I think some others are. I'm not sure if we should look at Ms. Gaines. Do you have an idea?
Yeah, if I could just make a proposal that we consider a Thursday, just because for myself, I have Thursdays kind of carved out already for school committee, so perhaps one of the off Thursdays that we don't meet might be a possibility.
Ms. Ratlaw?
I'm sorry, did I just miss, is there a time frame for this?
At the last meeting, I believe Mr. McMillan was thinking about, right after the holidays, so I was thinking, I would say if we could try to do it January or the beginning of February, that would be ideal as we kind of roll into the budget season to build understanding. But that's just.
13th.
13th.
Hold on, I gotta borrow Terry's mini calendar.
So we have meetings on the 6th and
Yeah.
the 20th.
Hey,
so
works.
13th.
Yeah, the 13th is a possibility. That works for folks. Sharon, I don't know if you can hear us.
Ms. Ratlaw?
Can I officially propose that we do a Thursday, January 13th? As a regular scheduled meeting, but it'll be a workshop in the conference room, 5:30.
Ms. Tully?
What time did you say, Jackie?
I said like 5:30,
Oh, okay.
could be 6:30.
Ms. Gaines?
Yeah, I would ask, make sure Sharon knows that. I believe if I understood Sharon's schedule, 5:30, Sharon, is that?
Well, let me just ask if there's any way we could do it the week before. We're getting close to vacation then. That's not vacation week, is it?
No, we're talking about January 13th.
Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear that well. January 13th.
You look at your calendar and Danielle has something.
I could not do 5:30. I would need to do 6:30.
Okay. But you could do the 13th?
Yes, yes.
And Ms. Gaines, you could do the 13th?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Russell?
Yes.
Sharon is inked in.
Already,
Already 21 calendar.
so it's a done deal.
It must be the extra month. or something.
Ms. Stout?
Yes.
I'm hoping that Ms. Scott will be available. Yeah. So is it just putting on our calendars? All right, so we will have a budget workshop on January 13th at 6:30. And it will be a workshop structure here.
High school conference room.
I think I would say, I don't know that necessarily we need a room this big. We have a couple other rooms in the building that might be, I think. Yes, I like was it 202?
Can we use just the conference room that we always?
I think the conference room might be too tight for all of us,
Oh,
and we want to have enough distance.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, also with the workshop, so we don't have to record, but we do have to take minutes. So we just need to make sure one of us, vice chair perhaps, takes minutes. Perhaps.
Perfect, that sounds great to me. Sharon, you had your hand up. Did you put it down purposely? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I did put it down. I don't have a question.
Okay.
I guess since you asked me, can we be kind of like 6 feet apart if we're all going to be in person?
I think it sounds like there's a room in the high school that will give us that ability to spread out and have that social distance opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, so we're putting it on the calendar for January 13th at 6:30 in a room A202. Okay. Moving on, we are going to discuss view the first reading, the policy file JJF LH, also called VIB. Wow. Student activity accounts, the Lighthouse Fund. Danielle, you want to speak to that?
Yes, so this is a new policy that has been drafted out of the subcommittee, the policy subcommittee's discussion. When we were reviewing the student activity accounts policy, we realized there was language in there about the Lighthouse Fund and it was vague. And we realized that we needed to give it some shape and some a place where it can live so that it can be useful for the district and principals as they're utilizing this fund, that both gives them flexibility, but also clarity to use these funds. And so this, it's pretty straightforward. It's a, I would say, a very short policy based on my experience reading other policies. But really, you know, within student activity accounts, there are many of them. And on the occasion that there is something that falls outside of the realm of a specific account that already exists, or an activity comes up that doesn't have a funding stream already attached to it, there's a need to allow the principals of each building to use their discretion to fund those activities. We had a very lengthy, I don't know, very lengthy, we had an in-depth conversation around ensuring that priority is given to students in need. That was the original intention of this policy. That there was a place where we often ask this question. I know I've heard it several times since I've joined the committee, and I've asked it myself, you know, what happens if there's an activity and the student wants to go, but they can't afford to participate in it? This fund is where those funds can always come from to support those students. And so I think it's important for the committee to also know that this is the intention of this policy also, so that we know that this is in place. We know that there is a fund to help support students in need when it comes to activities that they might be cost prohibitive for them to participate in. So I'll leave it at that. And I would also invite any of my fellow subcommittee members to chime in if I missed anything or misspoken, which is entirely possible.
Great job. So this is our first read. Do we have any discussion or questions or a motion to move to a second read? Sharon? Ms. Stout?
Just as a member of that committee, I've been on that since Monomoy started. I think the work of that session on this policy was amazing. We all agreed. It just, you know, the focus wasn't exclusively on students of need, but it was trying to make that, you know, a particular focus. And it was just exciting. I'm just very proud of the work of this policy here.
Great. All right, well, so without objection, we move this to come back at our next meeting for a second read. Excellent. All right, so moving on to subcommittee representatives and liaison reports. We, over the past couple of weeks, things have come up, questions about our policy file EBCFA base coverings. And so we have an update that I believe is coming from Ms. Tolley, with maybe some support from Ms. McGuire if needed.
Yes, so my understanding is that there was an error in the policy as it's written, and that it should have specified that masks are not required when physical education is outdoors. But the way it currently reads is that it looks as if masks are not required during physical education, and then another bullet point, or outside. And so it's a formatting actually correction that needs to be made, but it very much changes how the policy is read. Operationalized.
So it is my understanding that the policy will go back to the policy subcommittee to be edited, and then it will come back officially to our full committee. Is that everyone's understanding?
Yes. No. Good. No. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Melissa?
Where you have
I think
thoughts?
Superintendent has something. I think,
Thank you. Watch that.
She's so full of thoughts and policy stuff.
Yeah.
Melissa McGuire, Director of Service. So in thinking about this, as it was articulated through the first and second reading, conversation, because we had already made changes to the last edition of the policy. And it really was, as Ms. Charlie said, it's a formatting issue because masks are worn during physical education. That break in the outside is what the error is. So it's a clerical error, not a policy change, because we had already agreed on the policy of wearing face masks during gym. It was the outside piece. So and obviously at the will of the committee, if it needs to go back, it's really clerical.
Ms. Gaines?
yeah, that is correct, Melissa, but the only concern I have is it's not in our packet tonight, so we don't have it to look at, and I think I need to see it. I know what you're talking about, but I think for the public, and it wasn't in the packet, that would be my only concern with just agreeing to do this tonight.
Dr. Carpenter?
I'll also just clarify that gym classes do have students when they're inside wearing masks. So I think, there have been a couple interesting emails that have been sent to me. It's like, well, why are gym classes, wearing masks? And it's like, because we're in a pandemic with numbers going up. It's, so just rest assured that the gym classes are wearing masks. They will continue to wear masks until this policy we're at the right place and the pandemic's behind us, and we can all not be wearing masks.
Ms. Everett-Long?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, although it is a clerical error, I think it's the right thing to do, is considering it's not in our packet, that we send it back to policy, because even though the clerical error, it reads very differently and can be lost in translation. So I think the appropriate thing to do would be to have us bring it back to policy. It's going to be quick and easy. We know what we want to do, fix it, and then bring it back again. And if the superintendent's reporting that, the guidelines are being followed at this time, then there should be no problem with the timeliness of our policy.
So bring it back for our first read at our next meeting.
January 6th. Yep.
So
Ms. Stout?
Yes, I just want to clarify this because I know that, so the problem is, when I looked at it, is that it said that gym classes, and when we were, instead of numbering 1 to 3 or 1 to 6 or whatever, there were dots, like a lot of times when you list things. And so the last two said dot gym class and dot outside. From what I believe is correct is that just the dot before outside shouldn't have been there. So that was the complete, if I have it correctly, the complete error was just that clerical of having the dot before outside. If it was dot gym class outside, that was correct. So I actually disagree. I think that we should revote it right here and now because it's a clerical error. It doesn't need to keep going back and forth.
So Sharon, if I can just interrupt, I think just because we don't have it in our packet and we're not able to look at it right now, which, and it's not an action item to vote on, I think that as long as, Dr. Carpenter is saying that it's happening, the masks are being worn in gym, that, we can bring it back at the January 6th meeting and the policy subcommittee can make those edits in between now and then. and bring it back to us on January 6th.
Well, just let me ask this. So I understand it's not being done. I like the way it was put in here, that it was an error. I just don't want, because we're not revoting it. I really don't think it needs a vote. I think it's just being corrected here. But I'm not trying to argue about the semantics of this. I'm just really, really concerned watching the news and we see that after Thanksgiving, we had a resurgence of COVID, and we know for sure that we will be having a resurgence in right after the holidays of Christmas. So I just don't want if there's any questions at all, that it's very clear to the public. That's my only concern.
I'm clear.
Yeah.
All right, that's all. Thank you.
All right, so that will go back to the subcommittee.
Yeah.
Danielle?
And I just have a question for my own learning. Why wasn't it included in our package tonight?
It might have just been missed.
Clerical error.
Clerical error.
Should have been, it wasn't. Happens sometimes.
Okay, so when it's on our agenda like this, it
Should be.
even if it's an error, it should have been included, and if it were included, that would change then the process that we have to go through, correct? That's my understanding based on the conversation. Okay, thank you.
Yes. And Chair.
Ms. Gaines?
And if I could just go back to the agenda, and open meeting law is very specific, because if I were to read policy file face coverings update, I have no idea what the update is. And so open meeting law could challenge us because it's not specific enough to not have it in there. Does that make sense? So that would be my caution.
Okay. So it's going back. All right, so moving on to superintendent's report. Dr. Carpenter?
We'll start with no recognitions. Other than that you can just share, it's been refreshing that there is some of those steps towards normalcy. Last year during the holidays, we weren't seeing music happening, and to be at the elementary schools with the choir going through and caroling through the halls, and just to see all the sort of bubbling excitement of the kids, and to know that we have winter concerts happening, and even though we're just spacing out people and not as many people are able to come as in the past, it's those are some nice things and sort of signs that better days are yet to come and return to full normal at some point in the future. And then there's the COVID update, which continues to go as the trends have been going in the wrong direction. So in the past week, we were looking at 1 case at Chatham Elementary School, 7 cases at Harwich Elementary School, 5 at the middle school, and 3 at the high school. Full testing this week found 1 case at the high school, 1 at the middle school. So we not as many in full testing, or not as many positive polls this week. And hopefully, like just before Thanksgiving, there was a Thanksgiving miracle. Let's hope for a holiday miracle here when we do testing on this coming Monday. But the cases continue to rise, not just here, but throughout the state and in schools. That is what has been reported out there. In terms of safety protocols, this is a way I feel like you jinx myself, putting it on to talk about safety protocols, because even as I've been sitting here at the table, it's like I'm getting texts coming in, and there's like a new bubble thing out there when it comes to safety. I'll bring up here that I actually put this on the agenda initially to just sort of talk to the committee about what happens behind the scenes when tragic events like happened in Michigan, 30th of November, happened. So each year the schools have scheduled drills that they do, fire drills, but also lockdown drills, and we have our SROs and the police and fire will go work, particularly at the elementary schools, doing classroom. They do the drills, do similar drills at the middle school and high school, and cover where we evacuate to, and what to do. And it's there's the sadness I have at the same time that as a society we're at this place where we're where there are so many drills. I remember when my own kids were elementary aged and coming home and talking about, it's like, okay, today we went at the practice where we rushed out the door of the elementary school, and their elementary school, the bus lot was behind it, and they would evacuate into the buses and hide. To hear your elementary age kids come home and talking about, it's like we practiced the drill today, and you're just sort of wishing that you didn't have, that wasn't part of life. So, but we do have that, we do prepare. We also, debriefed the event that happened in Michigan, and just talking about it as a case studies, Edmonton, and how would we have responded to the different complexities of that one case. We have a meeting scheduled with our crisis team. That's a number of different individuals from the district administration, a number of our counseling staff and other support staff, along with police and fire, to talk about our MOUs and also debrief that case, and potentially other things that come up, and including the thing that has sort of spiraled in some level out of control in social media, which is my nemesis this day. So I guess at the moment out there on social media, there is a thing on the December 17th TikTok challenge to shoot up schools, and and there are some districts that have sent out emails to the entire parent community on this. I'm a little concerned that sending the email does two things: ratchets up everyone's anxiety, and at the same time creates the potential that it's planting seeds that need not or should not be planted. So when I talk with our staff, the belief is that we should put in the safety side, so we will have a greater police presence tomorrow because of what's out there in the TikTok world and social media. But it's so as I've been sitting here, I've been getting texts from different superintendents and phone calls. What are you? I'm sure it's what are you doing? How are you gonna? And there are some school districts out there that, because of the fear and anxiety, are going so far as to closing and locking down it. And it's just very sad. But that's it's like, for me, I've been an administrator so long. It's like I remember once upon a time when there wasn't a Facebook, there wasn't all this social media, and it's like it has gotten progressively, I think, more challenging, and at times, just that social media presence out there raises the anxiety level. So we will have police here tomorrow in the buildings and on our campuses far more present than they typically are, responding to something that I know is out there, and I know that families turn on the news tonight. I'm sure that one of the first stories, national news and local news, is going to be this, and I know some of our neighboring districts have sent out a message to all families that there's this December 17th challenge out there. We're well aware. We're doing something behind the scenes, and while I was sitting here just a few minutes ago, I got an email that's really sad from a Chatham elementary school parent, just scared about tomorrow. And she writes in this, she knows it's safe, but she's scared. I get it.
Oh,
Any questions?
I don't have any questions, just thank you. Thank you for taking the extra steps. Sad, but thank you for doing that.
Holly?
I would just echo, thank you. Right. Because it is so terrifying. And I'm very grateful for the foresight and the planning. And the looking out for everything. Word.
Okay. Moving on. We have two more action items. One being the second reading policy file JJF student activity accounts, but that was also not in our packet, so I'm not sure we can vote on that tonight. So we will bring that back for a second reading on January 6th. And we did have the presentation of warrants. So I am looking for a motion for adjournment. So moved. Second,
I would second it.
roll call vote. Ms. Stout,
Hi.
Ms. Tolly,
Hi.
Ms. Gaines. Aye. Ms. Rogers. Aye. Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Zebrat Long. Aye. And I am an aye, and we adjourn at 9:02.
Thank you.
Have a lovely evening.